If money lost all meaning tomorrow, your cash worthless, your bank locked, your card declined, what would you truly have left? When economies crash and paper becomes powerless, history shows that only real value survives: food, skills, trust, community, and knowledge. In this video, we uncover what still holds worth when the system fails and how you can prepare before it's too late. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see why true wealth isn't what you keep in your wallet. It's what you can do, create, and share. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the next few minutes could change how you see money forever. Every empire begins with a promise written not in stone or scripture, but on paper. Money, at its birth, is trust made tangible. A symbol of power, faith, and cooperation. A small, delicate token that says, "I owe you." But like all human inventions, money carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. And when it fails, civilizations are forced to confront a painful truth: the wealth they thought they had never truly existed. Our story begins in Rome. 2,000 years ago, the Roman denarius was among the most trusted currencies in the world. A small silver coin stamped with the face of an emperor, a symbol of stability and authority. For centuries, Roman citizens believed the denarius was eternal, just as they believed Rome itself was eternal. But as the empire expanded, the cost of maintaining its vast borders, the armies, the roads, the bureaucracy, grew unbearable. And rather than raising taxes or cutting expenses, Rome chose the easier path. They diluted their currency. At first, it was subtle. A little less silver, a little more copper. No one noticed. Then, year after year, the denarius lost weight, color, and meaning. Soldiers demanded more pay to compensate for the shrinking value. Merchants raised prices. Ordinary Romans found that the coins in their hands bought less and less each season. By the time of Emperor Diocletian, the denarius had become a ghost of its former self, a piece of metal with a memory of value. Inflation soared, trade faltered, and trust collapsed. People no longer cared what the emperor decreed. They cared only what their neighbors would accept in trade. And what survived when Roman money failed? Not the coin, not the empire, but the tangible, the useful, the real. Grain, salt, iron, livestock, land. These became the true stores of value. Families that owned productive land endured. Blacksmiths, farmers, and tradesmen still worked, still exchanged. While the wealthy, whose riches existed only in ledgers and imperial promises, saw their fortunes vanish overnight. Fast forward more than a millennium, and the same story would play out again, this time in Germany. In 1919, the First World War had left the nation in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles demanded reparations beyond comprehension, sums payable in gold, not in paper marks. But Germany's gold reserves were gone, and the government, desperate to keep the economy afloat, turned to the printing press. At first it worked. The new marks paid wages, funded reconstruction, and soothed the public's fears. But money created from nothing is trust borrowed from tomorrow, and tomorrow came swiftly. By 1923, prices were doubling every few days. Housewives rushed to markets with baskets of cash, only to find prices had changed before they arrived. Children played with bundles of worthless notes. People burned money for warmth because it was cheaper than buying firewood. What survived in Weimar Germany wasn't the mark, it was hard assets. Land, tools, food, and foreign currency. Farmers were suddenly kings, while bankers and bureaucrats starved. Those who had invested in real things, not promises, endured. And yet, each generation believes their money is different. In America, we've had our share of illusions. The Roaring Twenties, the dot-com bubble, The housing market of 2008, all periods when wealth seemed boundless, credit infinite, and prosperity permanent. And each time, the reckoning followed. When the Great Depression struck, it wasn't just stocks that vanished, it was the idea of security itself. Between 1929 and 1932, the U.S. stock market lost nearly 90% of its value. Banks closed. Families lost savings, homes, and futures. But once again, what survived was not financial trickery, it was practicality. Farmers could feed themselves. Mechanics could repair what others had abandoned. Communities with strong social bonds, where people shared labor, food, and knowledge, were the ones that endured. Because when money fails, society reverts to something more primal, exchange rooted in trust, in utility, in survival. History shows us that money is never the foundation, it's the facade. Behind every dollar, every mark, every denarius, there's a deeper economy of human need. In the aftermath of collapse, those who adapt, who can create, repair, grow, and trade, become the new wealthy. Not the ones holding paper, but the ones holding purpose. The lesson is uncomfortable, especially in an age where numbers on a screen define status. We tell ourselves that a rising stock market equals prosperity, that printed paper backed by government decree equals security. But these are only modern myths, elegant versions of the same illusions Rome once held. Every empire, every currency, every age eventually faces the same test: what happens when faith in money dies? It's easy to believe we're immune. That the Federal Reserve, the digital dollar, and the modern economy are too sophisticated to fail. But so thought the Romans. So thought the Germans. So thought every society before the storm. And yet, beneath the layers of innovation and policy, the fundamental rules remain unchanged. Value is not printed. It is produced. It's grown in fields, forged in workshops, taught in schools, and built in communities. Real wealth is the ability to meet real needs, to feed, to shelter, to protect, to create. When money fails, it isn't the end of civilization, it's the end of illusion. Every collapse in history has revealed something profound: that wealth measured in trust can vanish, but wealth measured in skill and substance endures. As Americans, we often take pride in our ingenuity, the belief that we can innovate our way out of anything. And that belief is part of what keeps the system running. But innovation without restraint, prosperity without grounding, and money without meaning, these are the seeds of the next collapse. We're living in an age where digits, not metal, define wealth. Our economy floats on confidence, debt, and data. Most of the money in existence today isn't printed, it's typed. And confidence is the only thing keeping it alive. The irony is that, for all our progress, we are more vulnerable than ever. A cyber attack, a power failure, a loss of trust in the dollar, any one of these could unravel the web we've spun. And when that happens, as history suggests it will, the question won't be how much money you have, but what you can do with your hands, your mind, and your community. Because when the numbers reset and the systems reboot, the people who endure will be those who remember the oldest truth of all. Money is not wealth. It's only the shadow of it. What survives when money fails are the things that never depended on it in the first place: integrity, skill, cooperation, and resilience. These are the currencies that never go bankrupt. And while every empire forgets that truth, the survivors, the farmers, the builders, the teachers, the makers, they never do. They always endure. The story of money's illusion didn't end with Rome or Weimar. It evolved, reshaped, and rebranded itself in ink and parchment, and later, in printed bills and glowing screens. The next great chapter in humanity's dance with wealth began not with conquest, but with confidence. When gold was heavy and trade grew vast, merchants and monarchs alike needed something lighter, a symbol of trust that could travel farther than coin. So, in the bustling cities of Renaissance Europe, banks began to issue paper receipts, promises that this fragile sheet could be redeemed for real metal stored in vaults. It was a revolutionary idea. Paper was easier to carry than gold, and as long as people trusted the banks, it worked flawlessly. The merchants of Venice and Amsterdam, the traders of London and Paris, all began to accept this new abstraction of wealth. But here's the irony: every innovation that makes life easier also makes us forget its roots. Over time, people stopped asking for the gold itself. They began trading the paper instead. By the 18th century, paper money wasn't just a convenience, it was the lifeblood of nations. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, set a new standard. It promised that every note could be exchanged for its weight in gold. For a while, it held true. The British pound became synonymous with global trust. As good as gold, they said. Across the Atlantic, the newly born United States admired that power and sought its own. The young republic struggled to define its currency after the Revolution. The Continental Dollar, printed to fund the war, quickly collapsed in value. "Not worth a continental," became a phrase of ridicule. Americans learned early that printing money without backing was a dangerous game. Yet, necessity has a way of rewriting wisdom. As the Industrial Revolution swept across the 19th century, economies grew at unimaginable speed. Railroads, factories, telegraphs, the machinery of progress needed financing, and that meant credit. Banks expanded, debt multiplied, and governments discovered the magic of money creation. Gold could not keep up with the pace of ambition. Then came 1913, the birth of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The idea was simple: stabilize the financial system by centralizing control of the nation's money supply. Few realized what it would become: the most powerful institution in economic history. The Fed's role was to manage the flow of money like an invisible hand, to ensure prosperity, prevent panic, and maintain faith in the dollar. But power over money is power over everything, and every promise of control carries a cost. In 1933, that cost arrived. The Great Depression shattered the illusion of endless growth. Banks failed by the thousands. Unemployment soared. And ordinary Americans, terrified, hoarded gold, the one thing they still trusted. President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a fateful decision. He ordered citizens to surrender their gold to the government. Private ownership of gold was banned, and the dollar's link to metal was broken. It was no longer a promise, it was a decree. From that day forward, the United States entered the true age of paper. The dollar became money not because it represented value, but because the government said it was value. The Federal Reserve's ability to create money was now virtually limitless. It worked for a time. The economy revived, confidence returned, and the war that followed cemented America's place as the world's economic leader. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system tied global currencies to the US dollar, and the dollar to gold. It was a clever illusion: stability on the surface, fragility beneath. As long as other nations believed in America's restraint, the system held. But restraint is rare in empires at their peak. By the late 1960s, the United States was spending beyond its means, on war in Vietnam, on domestic programs, on a lifestyle that exceeded production. Gold reserves shrank as foreign nations demanded redemption for their dollars. In 1971, President Richard Nixon faced an impossible choice: preserve the illusion or reveal the truth. He chose the former. With a stroke of a pen, Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar would no longer be backed by gold, or by anything at all. The modern era of fiat money had begun. Fiat, from the Latin, let it be done, money by decree. Wealth created not by work or scarcity, but by command. From that moment, the world's currencies became faith-based systems. Pieces of paper, later digits on screens, backed by nothing but confidence and military might. The world adjusted quickly. Markets soared, debt exploded, and governments discovered they could now print their way out of almost any crisis. But confidence is a fragile god. Through the oil shocks of the 1970s, the recessions of the 1980s, and the tech booms of the 1990s, America's new paper empire expanded. The dollar became not just national currency but the global reserve, the language of oil, trade, and power. To hold dollars was to hold influence. And yet the same pattern that doomed Rome, that humbled Weimar, was quietly returning, the widening gap between real value and financial illusion. By the early 2000s, debt had become the backbone of prosperity. Credit cards replaced savings. Housing prices became speculative bubbles. Money itself was multiplying faster than productivity. And still, people believed that this time was different. Then came 2008. A collapse born from the very heart of the system, the belief that risk could be packaged, sold, and forgotten. When the housing bubble burst, the illusion cracked. Major banks crumbled, markets froze, and panic swept the globe. But unlike in 1929, the system didn't reset. It was rescued. The Federal Reserve unleashed trillions of dollars into existence, digital money conjured with keystrokes. Bailouts saved corporations and banks. But the lesson was clear: if money can be created infinitely, its value depends solely on confidence. And confidence, once broken, never fully returns. Since that day, America and the world have lived in what economists call the everything bubble. Stocks, real estate, debt, all inflated by years of easy money. Growth without grounding. Prosperity without production. It feels normal now. The dollar still buys, the markets still rise, and life still goes on. But beneath the surface lies the same question that haunted Rome, Germany, and every empire before: what happens when faith runs out? For the first time in history, the entire global economy is built on promises that cannot all be kept. Every dollar is born as debt, and debt must grow to sustain the illusion. If it stops, even briefly, the system seizes. We have entered an age where the appearance of stability is maintained only by constant expansion. More credit, more printing, more intervention. But no system can inflate forever. Already, cracks are showing. The cost of living rises while wages stagnate. The gap between the rich and the poor widens into a canyon. The middle class, once the foundation of American strength, finds itself squeezed between taxes, debt, and inflation. History whispers again: when paper replaces principle, collapse follows. Yet the lesson isn't despair, it's preparation. Because every collapse brings renewal for those who understand what value truly is. Real value has never changed. It's the same in ancient Rome as it is in modern America. It's the field that produces food, the hand that crafts, the mind that innovates, and the community that cooperates. The age of paper gave us progress, but it also gave us fragility. It taught us to measure wealth in digits rather than deeds. And in doing so, it set the stage for the next great test, a test that will ask once again: when money fails, what will hold its value? By the dawn of the 21st century, money had become invisible. The green bills and jingling coins that once symbolized wealth now lived as numbers, in servers, spreadsheets, and glowing screens. The world had entered what economists proudly called the digital economy, an age of unprecedented growth, convenience, and connectivity. But beneath the algorithms and ambition, the same fragile foundation remained: faith. We trust the digits on our screens because we must. Our paychecks arrive electronically, our bills are paid automatically, our investments exist in apps. Few ever stop to ask a simple question: what, exactly, is this number backed by? In truth, it's backed by belief, the collective agreement that the system will continue, that tomorrow will resemble today. Confidence, not collateral, has become the cornerstone of global finance. In the early 2000s, this illusion seemed indestructible. The American dream, the house, the car, the retirement fund, was within reach for millions. Banks offered easy loans, corporations expanded, and politicians celebrated prosperity. The Federal Reserve promised to keep inflation low and growth steady. On paper, the future looked secure. But as history has shown, illusions thrive until reality interrupts. The 2008 financial crisis exposed how brittle that trust really was. It wasn't just Wall Street that collapsed, it was faith itself. Families watched their savings disappear overnight. Retirement funds evaporated. Homes were foreclosed not because people had failed, but because the very system had gambled with their futures. And yet, within a few years, the markets recovered. Or so it seemed. The Federal Reserve, the same institution created to stabilize the economy, had now become its lifeline. Trillions of dollars were created out of thin air to bail out the system, money that never existed before, conjured at the stroke of a keyboard. Most Americans didn't notice. The grocery stores stayed open, the lights stayed on, and the illusion held. The economy had been resuscitated, but it was no longer healthy. It was addicted. From that moment forward, growth became dependent not on productivity, but on printing. Each crisis demanded more stimulus, more credit, more creation of artificial wealth. The market learned that no matter how reckless the behavior, rescue would come. The illusion had matured into addiction. Then came 2020, the year that tested every system on Earth. The pandemic halted global trade, emptied cities, and froze economies. In response, governments unleashed a tidal wave of money unlike anything seen before. In the United States alone, more than $6 trillion were created in less than 2 years. Checks were sent to households, businesses were propped up, and markets soared even as unemployment reached historic highs. It was the purest expression of faith-based economics the world had ever seen. Prosperity conjured in a time of paralysis. Stocks hit records, real estate prices exploded, and ordinary Americans felt richer, at least for a moment. But printing wealth doesn't create wealth. It only dilutes it. By 2022, the illusion began to crack again. Prices surged. A cup of coffee that once cost $2.50 now costs $4. Gas doubled. Groceries climbed. Inflation, dismissed for years as a relic of the past, returned with a vengeance. People felt it first, long before economists admitted it. And once again, faith began to falter. When confidence erodes, money becomes memory. People turn from digital abstractions to tangible things: food, fuel, land, skills. In every crisis, the shift is the same, away from numbers, toward necessities. But this time, something new emerged, a rebellion against traditional money itself. The rise of cryptocurrency was born not merely from technology, but from distrust. Bitcoin, first dismissed as a fringe experiment, captured the imagination of millions who believed that code could replace confidence, that decentralized math could succeed where central banks had failed. For a moment, it seemed plausible. Bitcoin soared from pennies to tens of thousands of dollars. Digital millionaires were minted overnight. The media hailed it as the new gold. But just as quickly, reality returned. Speculation replaced purpose. Scams, collapses, and greed tarnished the vision. Crypto became a mirror of the very system it sought to replace, another illusion of easy wealth. And yet, beneath the volatility, the idea lingered that people were searching for something real. A hedge against faith-based finance. A lifeboat against the next collapse. Meanwhile, in the physical world, inequality deepened. The top 1% accumulated record wealth, while ordinary workers faced stagnant wages and rising costs. The cost of living soared, but official statistics claimed everything was fine. The illusion demanded belief, and so the narrative persisted. The American economy still looked powerful, its GDP immense, its corporations global, its currency still the world's reserve. But the foundation was increasingly psychological, not material. Every dollar's worth depended on a single fragile question: do people still trust it? And that question, though invisible, shapes everything. Trust is what keeps the grocery shelves stocked. Trust is what keeps gas pumps running. Trust is what allows strangers to exchange paper for food, digits for homes, and contracts for futures. If that trust fails, so does everything built upon it. It's easy to think of collapse as a sudden event, a market crash, a war, a panic. But history shows it's often slower, quieter. It begins as doubt. A whisper that spreads through the crowd. A few people selling early, a few withdrawing savings, a few choosing to barter instead of buy. Confidence drains not in days but in hearts. And yet, even as trust in institutions wanes, faith in human adaptation persists. In towns and small communities across America, people have quietly rediscovered old ways of resilience. Local farmers' markets thrive. Skilled trades, once dismissed as outdated, regain value. People learn to repair, to grow, to collaborate. It's not nostalgia, it's survival instinct. Every generation must relearn the lesson that their grandparents once lived, that real security is built on things you can touch, skills you can use, and people you can count on. In this digital age, that truth feels almost rebellious. The age of illusion has given us abundance, but also fragility. We've built a civilization so interconnected that one broken link, a cyber attack, a power grid failure, a digital outage, could bring it to its knees. And still, the illusion holds, because the alternative is terrifying. A world without faith and money is a world without order. So we continue to believe, to transact, to trust. But deep down, many sense what history already knows, that every financial system eventually faces its reckoning. Whether it's a sudden collapse or a slow erosion, the outcome is the same, the return to reality. And when that day comes, what will endure won't be the institutions or the currencies. It will be the same timeless assets that have survived every collapse before: food, land, community, skill, and trust, not in governments, but in one another. Because when money fails, civilization doesn't end. It remembers. It remembers that wealth was never digits or dollars, but the capacity to create, to sustain, and to adapt. The age of illusion may be our proudest era, but it may also be our most fragile. And when the illusion fades, the survivors will be those who never forgot what was real to begin with. When paper promises crumble and digital illusions fade, humanity always turns back to what it can touch, taste, and trust. History doesn't just record the fall of currencies. It records what rises after them, what people cling to when the numbers stop adding up. Because even when money fails, life goes on. Crops still grow. Tools still build. Skills still matter. Communities still gather to trade, repair, and survive. What disappears isn't civilization itself, it's the illusion that wealth could ever exist apart from real things. When the Roman denarius lost its worth, it wasn't the end of Rome's people. They returned to barter, to labor, to the basic rhythms of survival. In towns and villages, they learned again that a loaf of bread was worth more than a handful of coins, because bread feeds, and coins do not. Centuries later, after Weimar Germany's paper money turned to ash, the same story unfolded. Farmers became the backbone of survival. Urban families with nothing to trade but paper fled to the countryside, offering jewelry, clothes, and heirlooms for potatoes or milk. It was humbling, but it was also clarifying. In those desperate exchanges, value was rediscovered, not in gold, but in grain. When faith in money vanishes, people rediscover the power of labor and trust. The Great Depression in America brought a similar reckoning. The decade before had been a carnival of credit, roaring markets, easy loans, and paper wealth. When it all collapsed, what remained was the tangible, the family farm, the neighborhood workshop, the small store that accepted barter because dollars were scarce. And out of that collapse came a generation forged in resilience, men and women who understood that every dollar had to represent something earned, something real. They fixed rather than replaced, saved rather than spent, built rather than borrowed. They measured value not in price tags, but in endurance. We like to think of progress as linear, that each generation becomes more advanced, more secure, more prosperous. But history moves in cycles. Every period of excess is followed by one of reckoning, and every reckoning brings humanity back to its roots. Those roots are found not in markets or institutions, but in the human capacity to produce and adapt. Real value, the kind that endures collapse, always lives in the same places. It lives in land because land produces what money cannot: food, water, and stability. For thousands of years, ownership of fertile soil has been the foundation of survival. Empires rose around it, wars were fought for it, and civilizations flourished when they cared for it. In every collapse, from Rome to Zimbabwe, those who owned productive land outlasted those who owned paper claims. It lives in skills, because a world in crisis rewards those who can create or repair. A carpenter can trade work for food. A mechanic can keep vehicles moving when parts are scarce. A nurse or doctor becomes invaluable when systems fail. Knowledge, unlike currency, cannot be devalued or confiscated. It lives in resources, because tangible goods hold worth regardless of circumstance. Food, clean water, firewood, tools, and medicines remain essential in every age. In a stable economy, they are commodities. In a crisis, they are lifelines. It lives in community, because cooperation multiplies survival. A lone person with gold may perish, but a small group with trust can rebuild. During Argentina's 2001 collapse, it was local barter clubs, neighbors exchanging goods and services without money, that kept people fed. During the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, communities that shared tools and skills endured while isolated families struggled. And above all, real value lives in character, in the trust people place in one another. When the symbols of value fail, honesty becomes currency. A reputation for fairness becomes as valuable as food. In every collapsed society, those who maintained integrity became natural leaders. Those who clung to deceit lost everything, no matter how much they once possessed. This return to real value is not just survival, it is renewal. Each collapse, painful as it is, strips away illusions. It reveals what was always true, that human prosperity is built on production, not printing, on cooperation, not competition, on trust, not transactions. In that light, collapse is not an end but a correction, a violent reminder of what wealth actually means. Consider the post-Soviet collapse in the 1990s. When the ruble hyperinflated, stores emptied and savings vanished. But those with gardens, livestock, and trade skills survived. Barter became the new economy: eggs for gasoline, potatoes for medicine. The Soviet Empire had built its wealth on control, not creation, and when that control vanished, only those rooted in real value endured. The same story repeated in Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Inflation reached absurd levels, trillions of Zimbabwean dollars to buy a loaf of bread. Paper currency was printed faster than people could count it. But in the countryside, where people farmed and bartered, life went on. Value persisted where reality existed. Every example, across time and culture, reveals the same truth. When money fails, what remains is what was real all along. And yet, even in modern America, where comfort and convenience have dulled memory, that truth still flickers beneath the surface. After hurricanes, floods, or blackouts, people rediscover it in miniature, neighbors helping neighbors, food traded for fuel, hands working together when systems break. It is in those moments of crisis that we see the old economy, the economy of trust, labor, and substance, return, however briefly. In a world built on credit, this might sound archaic. But to our ancestors, it was common sense. They understood that money was only as strong as the community behind it. When that community failed, no currency could save it. And perhaps that's where the modern world has strayed furthest, from the idea that wealth is relational. We measure our success in accumulation, not contribution. But in every historical collapse, the ones who endured weren't those who had the most. They were those who gave the most, worked the most, and cooperated the most. As the cycle turns again, humanity will rediscover these truths. It always does. The form may change: digital currencies, blockchain systems, artificial intelligence, but the foundation cannot. When trust breaks, the world falls back on what it can feel and see. In that future, the question will not be how much do you have, but what can you do? It will not be how many dollars sit in your account, but who can you rely on? It will not be what did you buy, but what did you build? That is the return to real value. It's not a rejection of progress, but a reminder of perspective. For technology, when grounded in truth, can empower humanity. But when built on illusion, it enslaves it. Every empire, every economy, eventually forgets that balance, until the moment it is forced to remember. And when that moment comes again, as it always does, those who have prepared, not in fear but in wisdom, will become the stewards of the next age. They will rebuild, as their ancestors did, on the bedrock of reality, the soil, the skill, the spirit, and the trust between people. Because what survives when money fails is not wealth lost, it is wealth rediscovered. The wealth of usefulness. The wealth of community. The wealth of purpose. The age of illusions ends not with destruction, but with clarity. And clarity, once seen, can never be forgotten. Every collapse is both an ending and a beginning. When one system dies, another is born, shaped by what humanity chooses to remember and what it chooses to forget. The fall of money has never meant the fall of civilization. It has meant the fall of illusions. And from those ashes, the next form of value always emerges. The question is not if money will fail again. History assures us it will. The question is what will replace it. To answer that, we must look at where we stand today. The 21st century has given birth to the most complex economy the world has ever known. Invisible algorithms trade billions in microseconds. Governments borrow more than they can ever repay. Consumers buy what they cannot afford with money that barely exists. It is a magnificent, delicate web, beautiful, efficient, and dangerously dependent on belief. But beneath the skyscrapers, the stock charts, and the glowing devices, a quiet shift is already beginning. People are asking what wealth truly means. They are searching for stability in an unstable world, and some are finding it not in banks, but in themselves, their communities, and the things that last. Across small towns in America, a subtle return to tangible living has begun. Families are planting gardens, learning trades, and building small local businesses. Farmers' markets are thriving again. People are realizing that control over food, water, and energy is not just sustainability, it's sovereignty. The same mindset that built America, self-reliance, craftsmanship, and trust, is reawakening. Technology, too, is evolving. Blockchain, artificial intelligence, and decentralized systems have the potential to rebuild trust, if used wisely. In the best case, these tools can create a transparent economy where value is earned, tracked, and exchanged without manipulation. But technology alone cannot save humanity from greed. Only principle can. For centuries, money has been both a blessing and a curse, the tool that united nations and the weapon that destroyed them. It gave us prosperity, but it also tempted us to worship paper over purpose. Perhaps the next evolution of value will demand that we balance both, digital innovation grounded in human ethics. Imagine an economy where value is measured not only by profit, but by contribution. Where a craftsman's skill, a teacher's wisdom, a nurse's care, and a farmer's yield hold equal weight, not in a ledger of dollars, but in a network of trust. Such an economy may sound utopian, but history suggests it's not only possible, it's inevitable. Because every time the old system fails, people rebuild smaller, simpler, and stronger. After the Great Depression came a generation of frugality and discipline. After Weimar came decades of restraint and rebuilding. After each crisis, humanity corrects its excess, until memory fades and the cycle begins anew. The next collapse, whether digital, financial, or social, will likely force another reckoning. Perhaps it won't look like chaos. Perhaps it will be quieter, a slow shift away from centralized control toward local resilience. People will begin to value what they can see and trust: their community, their skills, their health, and their integrity. When the screen goes dark and the numbers disappear, those will be the currencies that remain. The currency of trust, built through honesty, reliability, and shared effort. In small communities, this trust becomes the foundation of trade and cooperation. It replaces contracts and credit scores with reputation and reliability. The currency of skill, because ability never inflates. A skilled person is valuable in any economy. The hands that build, the minds that heal, the hearts that lead, these are assets no collapse can erase. The currency of time, when material wealth loses meaning, time becomes the purest form of value. How you spend it, whom you share it with, and what you create in it defines your worth far more than any paycheck. The currency of character, the one wealth that cannot be stolen or destroyed. When systems fall, people follow those with courage, wisdom, and compassion. In chaos, leadership is measured not in authority, but in trust. These currencies are ancient, older than money itself. They are what built tribes, families, and nations long before the first coin was struck. Money was only ever a tool to simplify what already existed between people: faith. And faith, when restored to its rightful place, can build a better world. Still, to reach that world, we will have to endure the breaking of this one. The signs are already here. Inflation erodes purchasing power. Debt grows beyond comprehension. The middle class, once the engine of America, weakens under the weight of invisible costs. Each new generation inherits not stability, but uncertainty. Yet history shows that collapse is rarely total. It's a cleansing, a painful but necessary return to truth. The old structures that relied on deception fall away, making room for something more honest to grow. That's the paradox of failure. It destroys the false to preserve the real. When money fails again, and it will, the survivors will be those who have prepared not by hoarding wealth, but by cultivating wisdom. Those who invested in their skills, their relationships, and their integrity will emerge stronger. Imagine a generation that grows up knowing how to fix, not just consume, to grow, not just buy, to share, not just sell. That generation will rebuild the next economy, not on speculation, but on substance. It may start small, a local network of farmers trading goods, neighbors sharing tools, or families generating their own power. But from those seeds, as always, civilization will regrow. And one day, historians will look back and write about this age, the era when humanity realized that its greatest wealth was never digital or material, but moral. The next true currency won't be paper or pixels. It will be purpose. Purpose that drives creation, compassion, and contribution. Purpose that can't be printed, counterfeited, or destroyed by inflation. Purpose that gives meaning to work and value to life. This is the legacy every collapse leaves behind, the rediscovery of what was always true. So perhaps the end of money isn't something to fear. Perhaps it's something to prepare for, not with panic, but with perspective. Because when the illusion ends, what remains is what was real all along. Your hands, your mind, your family, your faith, your purpose. These are the treasures that no market can crash, no bank can freeze, no government can confiscate. They are the true wealth, the kind that survives when money fails. And in remembering that, perhaps humanity's next chapter will not repeat the mistakes of the past, but build something wiser, a civilization that values people over profit, truth over trust, and purpose over paper. Because what holds value when money fails is what has always held it. When the last dollar loses its power and the screens go dark, what will remain isn't chaos, it's clarity. True wealth has never lived in banks or balances. It lives in what we build, who we trust, and what we can do with our own hands. History reminds us that every collapse is a correction, a return to what's real. So as the world races forward, remember what endures: your skills, your integrity, your community, and your purpose. That's the wealth no crash can erase. If this journey made you think differently about money and value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the next time the system shakes, you'll want to be among those who already understand what truly survives when money fails.